Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles. I'm Ted Haptagaber, producer of the series, and joining us today are Alan Zweibel and Dave Barry. Alan has a new book titled Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier. It drops April 14th, available where books are sold. Last year, Alan interviewed Dave on our stage in LA when Dave's book, Lessons from Lucy, The Simple Joys of an Old Happy Dog, was published. So today we have the roles reversed. So thanks, Dave, for being part of this virtual doing. We have some questions that were submitted in advance via the Facebook, and we'll get to those later. But to get us started, how about you each tell us something about how you first met?
I first met when Alan invited me to his senior prom. I was in my mid-20s then. Alan was a high school student. And we were both straight at the time. And did not know each other, but I got this letter from Al, very charming. I had a picture of him, and he said, could I go to the prom with him? He had no friends, nobody in his high school liked him, and I was pretty famous at the time, so he thought it would be really impressive, and we did. We had a wonderful night. We ended up at a diner in New Jersey. There was no kissing or anything like that. I want to stress again, we were both straight, but it was a great night, and that's how I met him. And it was only years later that I found out he was in comedy, because he never said anything funny that night.
Well, just to take it from where Dave left off, I have that letter. I permaplacked it, and it hangs over our bed. If you ever looked up.
No, okay. The truth is, Ted, the way we met is I was Steve Martin. Was honored by the Kennedy Center with the Mark Twain Award, which is an award given in honor of a very famous writer to many people who are not writers. Although Steve Martin is a writer, so he was worthy of it. And he asked a bunch of people to come, and he's sort of a little bit of a roast. And he asked me to be one of the people doing that. So I was there. And Alan, of course, is nowhere near famous enough to actually be asked to be on stage roasting. He was there as some kind of lackey position. And but I was nice to him because I'm nice to everyone, regardless of their status in the community, even though mine is much higher than Alan's. And I was nice to him, and he appreciated that. And I think that's how the basis of our friendship.
Well, Dave got the Mark Twain and Washington, D.C. and Kennedy Center part absolutely right. The way I remember is that I was down there because I was helping my friend Larry David write his speech for Steve. And afterwards, at the hotel bar, if I'm not mistaken, Dave came up to me and said, would you like some more pretzels?
And that great line, that's just a small example of the kind of witty banter that goes on between two professionals like ourselves.
Yeah, we can't stop. Yeah, it's a gift.
But Alan is relentless. Everybody he's ever met, he stays in touch with. I learned this when I went on a book tour with him, and literally every single person in every single book signing line was somebody who claimed to be Alan's friend. And he latched onto me like a remora from that Kennedy Center thing. And we would run into each other at various events. And eventually, Alan and I decided to write a book together. And it was the only thing I could think of to get rid of him. And we wrote a book together called Lunatics and went on a book tour together. So we became pretty close friends despite the hygiene situation.
Dave was great on that book tour. He put up with a lot from me because I brought, if I'm not mistaken, about 7 or 8 pieces of luggage and a couple of garment bags.
Yeah, we were going to go like on a 2-week book tour in the middle of winter to like Dayton, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, and Alan brought 2 or 3 bathing suits. I don't remember.
Well, I brought 3 bathing suits because I had 3 different colored socks, and I wanted to make sure they sort of matched when I hung out at the pool.
Because like when you go on a book tour, you get a schedule, and it says 7 a.m. pick up at the hotel, to this radio station, this radio station, this radio station, this TV station, this interview, this. At the end of the day, there's a book signing, and then you got to get to the airport to fly to the next place. There's never ever in the book tour schedule I've ever seen swim time.
Yeah, well, I misunderstood the itinerary because what Dave doesn't know is that I also brought some swimmies and one of those tubes, inflated tubes, that I could putter around in the pool in. But I kept those deflated because we were in a rush.
I love your book.
Thank you.
I'm not kidding. I really did. And I'm going to get into the subject of the book in a bit. But I have my first question involves like the how of the book. There are a lot of details in this book, a lot of names, a lot of dates, a lot of, and because you had an incredible career. You've worked with it. I did not know, for example, before I read this book, that you were one of the founding members of the Beatles.
Yeah.
It's in the book, so I figure that one isn't true, nor did he ever date Sophia Loren. But Alan, over the course of his show business career, has worked with many, 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 many people. And we're going to talk about those. But my first question is, how did you remember? I could not possibly name all the people I've worked with in my life in various capacities. You have this incredible, detailed account of year after year of people you worked with, shows you worked on. How do you remember all that?
It's interesting. It wasn't hard because I would take sections of my career and go, okay, before SNL was writing for these comedians up in the Catskill Mountains. Okay, who did I write for? So that became a list. And then, okay, SNL, well, that sort of wrote itself in terms of Gilda and Belushi and the hosts that came in, Dan Aykroyd. And then post SNL, there were milestones. There was Gary Shandling, and there was you, and there was Billy Crystal. So it was not as hard, but I surprised myself at times because when I would start writing about a specific era, I go, oh yeah, that's when I wrote Dragnet with Dan Aykroyd. So that came into it. So I didn't have a time. I had a general timeline, but when I got into the writing, I was able to put in other smaller incidental things. I found that interesting myself because I don't have total recall of it.
Are you a person who saves letters, emails? Do you save everything? Or, how did you dig it all up?
Well, something, I saved some things. We have Robin, my wife, worked on SNL. So there was a lot of memorabilia that when we left the show in 1980, she basically stole. Okay. We got files of old things. And so a lot of it existed, and that gave me reason to say, oh yeah, I forgot when Buck Henry got, his, with the samurai sword, when I wrote the Samurai Stockbroker, that's when he got his, a cut, when John withdrew the sword. And it cut Buck above the eye. And, oh, yeah, I remember that show vividly. He had a Band-Aid on, and for the rest of the show, everybody else in the cast started putting a Band-Aid on. And then by the time everybody said goodnight, they were on the stage, everyone had Band-Aids in the same exact place. So some of it was inspired by what we have here. Yeah.
Okay, I want to start with talking about the cover a little bit. Okay, here's the cover, just for the same people who didn't see. Your face does not actually, it's covered in the cover of the book. And now, one possible explanation for that is that you're hideously ugly. But we're going to set that aside. It seemed to me that, and maybe I'm wrong, because the nature of your career has been, and you say it in the book, helping funny people be funnier. You're a behind the scenes most of the time guy. I know you do public speaking and everything, but your career has largely been writing lines that other people deliver. And you're intimately involved with Gary Shandling show, but he was the guy on the camera, you were the guy behind the camera. Was that kind of the idea behind the cover of the book? Like, you're not seeing me, you're seeing words I've written.
You know something? What the publishing company did was send me two different designs for the cover. This was one of them. It made me laugh, and then I forgot about it. I never said no. Okay. I thought that somewhere along the line, we said, okay, what's the cover really going to be? The next thing I know, it's on Amazon. A year had gone by. It's on Amazon. This is the cover. And I'm going, oh, did I really want that to be the cover? Well, that ship had already sailed. And as with a few tweaks, that was the cover. And I've grown to really like it. But as far as you thinking, or anybody thinking that that's the implication, I guess so. I mean, but I didn't say, all right, let's do that because that will signify that. It just, maybe that's what the artist thought. But
we'll just go with it. The focus group thought you were really ugly and they went covered it. That's excellent. But it leads me to, okay, you open the book, you talk a little bit about insecurity. And I can relate to that a little bit. In the comedy field, there's the people who get up on stage and get the laughs directly. And then there are people like you and me who write the humor. In my case, to have other, people read it themselves. In your case, more often to have somebody else deliver it. But do you think there's a certain insecurity that leads to that? I mean, I think in my case, yes, that I'm a little unsure of myself, rather not be the guy on the stage, rather not be the guy getting the attention directly, even though I want my humor to be the one that makes them laugh. Do you feel that's?
There may be a little bit of that, Dave, but over the years, what I've done, I like writing so much. I love the task of it. I love, the puzzle of sitting down with your words and, okay, what image can I make? Or if delivered, what will get a laugh? That so many of my friends who are comedians or comedy actors, that's their craft. That's what they hone. And if I did that, that would take that much time away from the writing part. So the balance that I've struck is that, okay, I'll write scripts, I'll write articles, books, whatever, and I'll go out with you and we'll be in front of an audience and we'll talk. I'll go on talk shows and do the same thing. I'll go by myself and speak at a fundraiser or a corporate event. So there's some balance over there. If I had to do it over again, I would probably do the same thing. I'm having my cake and eating it, as the kids say. I don't know who these kids are, but they're saying it a lot.
I have never heard a kid say that. I never, even when I was a kid, we didn't say that. So,
well, I'm going to send some kids once this coronavirus thing is over. I'm going to send some kids
over to my house. Okay, well, let's talk about your book. Starts out the early days, the Catskills. You were writing for a generation. You make a big point of this. It wasn't your generation you were writing jokes for. It was older guys, cummerbund comedians with dentures that you were writing for. And I love. Okay, I don't know why, but tell me about Morty Kunti.
Morty Kunti was Morty Kunti was a Catskill comedian. He got a little bit of up there within the confines of the Catskill Mountains. He was what they called a semi-name. Okay, there were unknowns, semi-names, names, big names, stars, superstars. He was a semi-name, and I guess he became a semi-name because in the New York area he had a kid show called The Funny Company. And he also, for you trivia buffs out there, when Carl Reiner did the pilot for the Dick Van Dyke Show, there were two pilots. The first pilot, Morty Kunti played what ultimately became Maury Amsterdam's role in the second pilot. Okay, but he had a name out there, and being a kid who grew up on Long Island, our parents would take us to the Catskills for holiday weekends, and I'd see these guys, and Morty Kunti would be one of them. He was the first guy whoever gave me money. It's in the book. There's actually a Xerox copy of the check he gave me for $25. And for those of you who are drooling out there, wow, he got 25. No, God knows how many jokes I had to give him to get that $25. The going rate was $7 a joke, but for $25, and for you math students out there, 7 doesn't go into 25 that easily. So I must have had to give him maybe 10 jokes for that $25.
I'm surprised it wasn't 18, but anyway.
Yeah, well, 18, yeah, it was, being that it's mostly Jewish up there. I did get $18 for one joke that I had written for a comedian named Freddie Roman, where I'd said that that I was writing a new porno movie where the entire cast were Hasidic Jews, which was very unusual, especially the orgy scene, because the men were on one side of the room and the women were on the other. And it was like a feeding frenzy that drove it up to $18 for that one.
That's worth 18 now. So, okay, so you're writing, and as you say in the book, you're writing jokes for joke tellers. And the joke was kind of independent of the teller. I mean, the job of the comedian was to deliver the jokes. I kind of think the epitome of that would be somebody like Henny Youngman, where he could just joke. And it really wasn't, except for my wife, it wasn't really about Henny Youngman. It was just, he was good at delivering this vehicle, this joke. And you were writing those jokes. Then you had to gradually transition, well, actually quickly transition into a different kind of comedy, the kind of comedy that was coming along in the late 60s, early 70s, which was very, very different, our generation's comedy. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, you know something, when I was writing for those guys, as you just said, I was writing jokes for the sake of jokes. A joke that had a beginning, a middle, and then a punchline. And it could have been delivered by anybody because these guys did not have any distinct personalities. They were not characters. And when I got to SNL, and how I got to SNL was I took all the jokes those guys wouldn't buy from me, made a stand-up act for myself, and delivered it at the place called The Improvisation, another place in New York called Catch a Rising Star. I delivered it with the hopes that somebody would come in and want to represent me. This was the new form of comedy because you had people like David Steinberg and Robert Klein and Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin. This was more of our generation, a little bit older, but spoke the same language more so. And then Lorne Michaels came in one night, heard my jokes, wanted to see more. And that's why I got the job. And when I got to SNL, it was totally different because the jokes I wrote for those people, like I said, were jokes in and of themselves. Now it was about writing for characters. It was writing for guys like Gilda and Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, who were improv players. So they would create a character and you go, okay, I got to write for this samurai guy now. I got to write for somebody who's a fast-talking, pitchman, like Dan Aykroyd, selling a bag of glass, for kids. So it was a big transition because they had to be specific to those voices, number one. And number two, it was more visual because like you just said, those guys in the Catskills were joke tellers. They had tuxedos on and cummerbunds. Here, Emily Latella, a character that Gilda did, had a distinctive sweater on and glasses with a chain thing. And okay, this is what the character looks like. This is what she sounds like. What would be funny coming out of that person's mouth? So it was a big transition.
Okay, Gilda, you talk about Gilda, and we'll get into a little bit more. There are two people that really resonate in the book that as kind of extremely important characters in your life. One is Gilda Radner, the other is Gary Shandling. We'll start with Gilda. Talk a little bit about how you came to work with her when your relationship developed at SNL.
It started the very first day at SNL. I looked around and I saw Belushi and I saw Aykroyd and I saw Chevy and Franken and Lorraine Newman. I'm going, wow, I had never seen this kind of comedy before. I don't think I ever heard of Second City until I got there and learned about it. And I felt a little overwhelmed. There was in the corner of Lorne's office was a big potted plant. I went behind the plant and I squatted down. I didn't want to be called out. And, I figured that I would, not measure up to these guys. So I was sort of squatting there when all of a sudden, once the meeting started, where people were talking about this new show, I heard a girl's voice from the other side of the plant ask, can you help me be a parakeet? And I parted the leaves and I looked out and I saw Gilda there. And I went, watch. He said, yeah, I think it would be really funny if I stood on a perch and sort of scrunched up my face and spoke like a parakeet. She says, but I need a writer to help me figure out what the parakeet should say. Are you a good parakeet writer? I had no idea what she was talking about, but I'm a great parakeet writer. she was also nervous. It was her first TV show too. So she came around, and now we're both squatting behind this plant. And while this meeting was going on, that's when I got to know her and we got to talking. And she declared to the rest of the room when she went out in front of the plant that she and I were going to be writing partners and platonic friends forever. I was thrilled about the platonic friend part, by the way.
My only problem with that anecdote is I cannot picture a plant that would fit into a building that you could hide behind. But anyway, moving along. So you talk about the early days of Saturday Night Live, unbelievable experience working with those people. Everybody knows that was the golden age of that show. Belushi, Aykroyd, Gilda, Bill Murray, all those people that came through. And then you talk about in season 4 hitting a dry patch. This really resonated with me. I think everybody who does what we do, which is basically go around saying, I can be funny. The terror you have lurking always is at some point you won't be funny. And you go through that. I mean, there are times where you just don't feel funny, or you wrote something that isn't that funny, and you feel like you failed, and you don't think at least in my case, you'll never get it back. You've lost it, whatever it was. It's a terrifying feeling. You said that happened to you in the 4th season of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
You talk about you would walk into you talked about sucking the air out of the writer's room. What was that like?
It was horrifying. It was, TV is a very collaborative process when it comes to writing. You've got a team of writers, and there's a couple of reasons for it. I mean, you've got a live show or any show to put on every week. You've got different sensibilities, so all the characters don't sound the same or have the same point of view. But another reason you have it is that there's the expectation there are going to be peaks and valleys in terms of your output. And in the 4th year that I was at SNL, I hit a real dry patch. I started going out with Robin, who worked on the show. She's now my wife. We got over our little breakup that we had there, but I went into this tailspin, and I was just exhausted. And I would go into the writer's room, and the show was written on Tuesdays by and large, and we were up all night Tuesday night, and people would gather into different rooms, different clusters of people, and what you wanted to do is have your initials at the top of the page to show that you participated in the writing of that sketch. And I couldn't think of anything by myself, so I would go into these other rooms with the hopes that I can contribute, so my initials would be, oh, at least Alan did something this week. I'd sit there, and I was the guy who somebody would say something funny, and then I would repeat what they said, just so my voice would be heard, and everybody would just look at me when we just heard that. And then when I would try something of my own and not repeating something else, it literally, everybody would stop dead. You can see skid marks on the floor where I stopped the momentum of whatever they had built up. And somebody like Franken or Tom Davis, who was his partner, would take me outside because it would be 3, 4 in the morning and actually say to me, listen, if you're going to stay in the room, keep your mouth shut. You're killing us. And that lasted for a number of shows. And it's really interesting. Years later, when I was on Conan O'Brien's show, now Conan got his start as a writer on SNL. And when he came into my dressing room, now Conan is already Conan at this point. He came in to welcome his guests. He went to their respective dressing rooms, but he started talking to me, and I didn't know him that well. Just knew him just to say hi. And he had not been with SNL for many years at this point. He brought up what it felt like being a writer on the show, not having anything on the show that week. God forbid if 2 or 3 shows went by, you felt just awful, So it's also the nature of a live show. You have Monday to redeem yourself, But yeah, it's a scary feeling when you're supposed to be this funny guy and everything is just gloomy.
I just I didn't do much collaborative writing in my career. The only time I really did it was I was one of the writers for Steve Martin when he hosted the Oscars. I did that twice. And I do remember the terror of sitting in the room and everybody in the room was a, veteran Hollywood, LA joke writer, really good, really quick, really sharp. And on the one hand, it was nice to know that there were all these people around who were funny. If you couldn't think of something right away, or you thought a part of something, they could finish it, that kind of thing. But it was also terrifying what you're saying, the feeling like I've done nothing. The last 3 hours have gone by and I haven't made Steve Martin laugh once yet. I failed. So that's kind of a brutal part of it. So anyway, you recovered from that, and we're going to get to a couple of other failures you had, because in my mind,
okay, I can't wait.
No, I'm being very sincere. My favorite parts of this book are when you talk about failure, because I think everybody who does anything creative has to deal with that, and you've had to deal with it in some unbelievably humiliating ways, and yet you came out of it always stronger. I hate to be sincere, but I really admire the way you handled failure in your life. But anyway, so you come out of that season 4, you marry Robin, and I just wanted to. One thing you said in the book just made me laugh out loud. You talked about like how you have to explain to your soon-to-be wife what it's going to be like to be married to you. A person does what you do, and I could so relate to this. You said that you said like she's going to have to understand that when you're driving and you're going to say to her, when we get home, make sure you remind me about Hitler's tonsils. I don't know why. And I get like that is so, because I've said that exact kind of thing to Michelle so many times. Would you please tell me what it was about Hitler's tonsils? Do you even remember?
I think look, here was a guy, not only did he give, big orations and everything, but he was loud. I just, probably at the time I'm going, wow, those things are either, super strong or they're really taking a beating. That's all I can remember.
At the time, it seems funny to you, I'm sure. Anyway, okay, so you moved on from, and there's a little bit of an interim, and then you end up in what a lot of people think, including me, is one of the funniest shows ever made for television. It's Garry Shandling's show, which is an absolutely brilliant show. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into that and what it was like?
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I was, after SNL, there was a real fallow period. I chose to stay in New York as opposed to going to LA. I always wanted to be a New York writer. Robin and I started having a family, and, money wasn't the huge issue, but it became an issue because there was the SNL, there was a paycheck every week, and then there were residuals. And now it was a few years afterwards, and those residuals dwindled, and there was a new show going on that I wasn't a part of. I got a phone call one day from my manager, a man named Bernie Brillstein, who asked me if I knew who Garry Shandling was. And I did know who he was because I had seen him on Letterman, and I thought he was really funny. Bernie managed him as well. He and a guy named Brad Gray had a company called Brillstein Gray, and Brad handled at the time these unknown comedians like Garry Shandling and John Lovitz and Dennis Miller and Dana Carvey and Bill Maher. Nobody had ever heard these people, but he said, this is the next wave. And I said, yeah, I do know who Shandling is. Bernie, who was this big, gruff guy, if Kenny Rogers and Santa Claus had a kid, it would be Bernie, okay? Big white beard. He said, well, he said, Shandling is doing a special for Showtime that's going to go right into the shit house if they don't get another writer in there. So they sent me the script. I called up Bernie. I said, I think this is funny. I think I could help it. So I went out to LA. I went straight from the airport to the restaurant to meet Garry, and he was wearing dark sunglasses. This was at night. This was dinner in a restaurant. And so I couldn't get a read on the guy as to whether or not he liked my ideas for the script, whether he liked me. I just couldn't read him. We left each other. He said, okay, we'll keep in touch. And I had no idea if I'd ever see him again. I went to whatever hotel, checked in, went to sleep. 1 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings in the room. Now, this is 4 o'clock for my body, okay? Because I flew out from New York that day. And I pick up the phone, and hello, and he goes, Alan, it's Gary. I go, hey, man, what's doing? Alan, my dog's penis tastes bitter. You think it's his diet or what? I just started laughing. And I called up Rob and I said, I think I found a writing partner. And we hit it off. It was like, for me, it was like lightning had, it struck a second time, first with Gilda, and now this guy that we were so similar. He had an idea for a series where he plays himself, a comedian, a single guy who spoke to the camera. Coincidentally, I had an idea for a show about a married guy, a comedy writer who spoke to camera, as if Dick Van Dyke spoke to camera on his show. We took the two ideas, we blended them together, and we just hit it off. And you got to understand that this was '86, so this was the beginning of original programming on cable. So just like Lorne, when he did SNL, when he founded SNL, it was late night. It was 11:30 to 1. Nobody really cared about it. You know, they just took something, you know, the SNL was something that was going to replace the Johnny Carson reruns on Saturday night. When Showtime bought and put on its Gary Shandling show, it was virgin territory, comedy for cable. And they left us alone. And so we had free reign, and we made this show. And it was like, okay, an ordinary situation comedy would dissolve from this scene to that scene. No, we won't do that. We'll just have Gary say, okay, here's where we are in the story. It's 2 hours later, and I got to deal with this cop. So we had fun with the theatrical nature of it. And we wrote a song, the theme song. This is how well we got along together. I remember the meeting where we came up with a name for the show. I said it should be Gary Shandling Show. Gary added the its, and I went, oh, that's really great. That's what it should be called. And we were in Bernie Brillstein and Brad Gray's office, and now it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and we go down the elevator, and while we're waiting for the elevator, Gary says, you know, we're going to need a theme song. I said, yeah, what are you thinking? He says, well, what about if we have a theme song about the theme song? And I said, what do you mean? What are you thinking? He goes, and he started singing, this is the theme to Gary's show, the theme to Gary's show. Gary called me up and asked if I would write his theme song. And then I just started singing. I'm almost halfway finished. How do you like it so far? How do you like the theme to Gary's show? And then he said, this is the theme to Gary's show, the opening theme to Gary's show. And I sang, this is the music that you hear as you watch the credits. Then he said, I'm almost to the part where I start to whistle. And then we'll watch it's Gary Shandling show. We started whistling on the elevator. We get down to the bottom floor. Before the doors open, we both say, this was the theme to Gary Shandling show. The doors open. We walk out into the lobby. You know, it was like 5 after 11. Go, you know, it's been a full day. I'll see you tomorrow. It was magical. It was really great.
I think that's also how Bob Dylan writes a lot of songs.
Yeah, in elevators. Yeah.
So you tell a story, an anecdote in there about your relationship with Shandling and it sort of harks back to the beginning of the whole book, where you're the guy behind the guy. You're the guy writing the words, but you're not. And the relationship between you and the performer. You talk about when it involves a flight. He has to take a flight. And do you remember this anecdote? It's in your book.
Yes, I do. I do. You know, it's a very, very fine line that a writer and the person that he's writing for have. There's a little bit of, you know, there's a synergy. Okay, 1 and 1 equal 3. The alchemy is such where, you're going to come up with something that neither of you could have done individually. But in the case of writing with somebody for that person, there's a little bit of servitude. I'm writing something either with him or alone that he's the one who's going to be on stage delivering. So in a sense, no matter how equal we are partner-wise, I'm working for him when it comes to that. Very early on, the anecdote that you're talking about is when we were writing the pilot, he was here in New York, and whatever hotel he was at, and we actually wrote the pilot on different coasts. He lived in Sherman Oaks, California. I lived in New York, and we would take each scene and write it and FedEx it to the other person, okay? And it would go back and forth that way. There's certainly no internet where you can look the way we were lunatics. And while we were just blocking out the scenes, what was the story, what were the scenes, at one point, because he was going to go back to LA the next day, he asked me to call the travel agent, or was it the airlines, and make reservations for him for a plane. And I thought he was kidding. And he said it a second and then a third time, and I realized he wasn't kidding. And I said to him, now listen, and you gotta understand, I needed this gig, okay? I hadn't worked in a couple of years. I knew that there was the possibility of this being a really good career move, okay? Because it was so different than, cable, like I said, was ready for this. I said to him, listen, I'm going to be writing with you. I'm going to be writing for you. And it's a creative partnership, and hopefully we'll become friends. I said, but I'm going to draw the line right now. I'm not going to make your airline reservations. I'm not going to perform that kind of function for you. And I said, we're creative partners. And he got silent and he looked at me. He nodded his head and he said, good. And I went, good, good. I said, was this a test? He said, I wanted to see where you stood and I want us to be equal. And I passed this test. And it was the weirdest way, because something like that you would figure is just understood between two people. You've never asked me to make plane reservations for you, nor have I ever done that. We're friends and you just do stuff. But with Gary, there were rules.
Yeah, and yet when we travel together, you do my laundry, and I don't appreciate it.
But don't forget, with me doing your laundry, I offered. Okay, you never requested. You certainly never demanded. As a matter of fact, if I remember, every hotel we went to, I'd knock on your door 10 minutes after we checked in and said, Dave, can you fill up that plastic bag that's hanging in the closet? I'll take it downstairs.
And I don't appreciate it. Well, okay, so you and Gary, you developed the show. The show is hugely successful, at least in terms of winning awards. It's like still sort of a cult classic. But the relationship between you two cooled and reached a point, you say in the book, where you were barely speaking to each other. How is that possible?
It was possible because, and I'll take my share of the blame here, by the third year of the show, it was an autobiographical show. Like, obviously the sensibility was what made it attractive, but he was a single guy living alone. I was married. I now had 3 kids. I was the commissioner of our son's Little League. I had different life experiences that, because the TV show is 24/7, on any TV series, you're working on 3 shows at the same time, okay? You're editing last week's show, you're producing this week's show, and you're writing next week's show. It's really a full-time job. Weekends are spent in editing rooms. And I had 3 kids, and Gary was single, living by himself, and the show was his marriage. The show was his family. And he would get upset if I wasn't available to talk to him about a script, or why did I pick a 2-shot instead of a single of him in an edit that I sent to him. And I'd say to him, listen, we took the kids to Disneyland. It's Sunday. We have a whole week off ahead of us, plenty of time to talk about these things. And I think that I grew to resent how this was tying my hands a little bit, both creatively, and he was a little bit overreaching over here, just like the same guy who wanted me to make his travel plans for him. He wanted me to be there for him and to service him and his show. So I resented it. and I wanted to flex other muscles writing-wise. He resisted that because he played a single guy. How is he going to play or relate to the commissioner of the Little League? So I think it was a lot of fatigue. I think it was, we started growing apart, though, in terms of what we wanted to do creatively. And by the end of the fourth season, we were hardly speaking to each other. That's absolutely true. And it was only a few months later when we were back in New Jersey, because I had moved the family out to LA. We kept a home in New Jersey. Robin saw in the newspaper that Gary was appearing in Atlantic City. She called him and she said, listen, I'm taking Alan down there. I'm throwing the two of you in a room and you're not coming out together until you're friends again. You've been through too much together. And that's exactly what happened.
After the Gary Shandling part of your book, it takes a little bit of a dark turn. First, you talk about Gilda and losing Gilda, and that
right
took a huge toll on you. And I'm not going to go into that now because I just am not gonna. But no, I mean, it's a very moving part of the book, and but what comes next? I totally blind. I did not know you were in this. The title of your book is Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier. You talk in this, and it's a fascinating chapter about producing a show, or I think you were the showrunner for a show called Good Sports with Ryan O'Neal and Farrah Fawcett. And you are unsparing in your criticism of their comic abilities. In other words, these are two people who are just, you say, they're just not funny. And you had this all-star lineup of writers. Everything was set for it to be, you had the budget, you had the network, you had everything. And you knew from the start, you knew going in that it wasn't going to work. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah.
Especially leave in the part about where Farrah Fawcett shows you her breasts. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm going to build to that. And then then I think whatever time we have left should be about that. After it's Gary Shandling's show, I was sort of hot in television, and Bernie called me up and said, I got two words for you. I said, Castle Rock. That was Rob Reiner's new company, and they wanted me to come and sign me to a long-term deal there. Larry David had just started Seinfeld for Castle Rock. Billy Crystal, my other good friend, had just done City Slickers and When Harry Met Sally, and I'd be with Rob, I'd be with my friends. And he says, no, Farrah and Ryan were the two words. CBS was in third place, and this was the day that they were TV stars or movie stars, and they wanted somebody to create a show for Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal, a romantic comedy. And I said, no. I said, I don't find anything romantic about them. They're always in the tabloids. They're always beating the shit out of each other. And comedically speaking, yeah, Ryan was good. I liked him in Paper Moon, and he had done a movie called So Fine that, yeah, he was funny. He did a movie that my friend Buck Henry had written. I can't remember it right now. I'll think about it in a second. With Barbara Streisand, there was a suitcase that was a whodunit or something in San Francisco. And I'm going, okay, he could do it. But everything I had seen her in, she got the shit kicked out of her by some spouse. And then she set his bed on fire. I said, where are the jokes? And what had happened previous to it, when I left SNL, I had been offered to be the showrunner for a new show called Cosby. And I turned it down. And Cosby's show became this monster hit. And then when we had started It's Gary Shandling's show, the same company had asked me if Carsey Werner was the production company, if I wanted to create a show or be the showrunner for Roseanne Barr, okay? And I said no. So now this opportunity comes along. I go, oh man, what? I don't want to do this, but am I going to turn down another thing that could possibly be a big network hit? This was CBS. All my success had either been in late night or cable. And this was, wow, if I can get a hit on the network, maybe I can have my own production company. I become my friend James L. Brooks or Rob Reiner. And I'm going, all right, I don't want to turn something down again 3 times. And I talked myself into it. I didn't want to do it. I would bolt upright in bed in the middle of the night. Robin said, "You don't want to do this, do you?" I said, and I'm sweating, okay, bullets. And my friend Herb Sargent, who was a mentor of mine, older man who had worked at SNL, and I was still in touch with him, he would say, "Why are you doing this?" And I talked myself into it. And it was a show called Good Sports that I created. It was with the 2 of them I took from their lives, where they played these lovers, or former lovers in this case, who had this enmity between them, and they didn't like each other off screen, but they were the network or the cable station that I made up. They went good together they had to work with each other. They had to work on television. I hired, I think about 3 or 4 Tony Award winners to be the supporting cast. The writer's room must have had a dozen Emmys. And it was one of those network situations where the reason the show was on the air was because of these 2 stars. And the reason the show got kicked off the air was because of these 2 stars. I couldn't capture the funny in them. I don't know if there's a person who ever lived who could capture the funny in them, but it was horrible. They fought all the time. They weren't funny. We had a live studio audience who, between scenes, had to wait an hour and a half for Farrah to have her hairdo redone. And well, that's not conducive for comedy when you have a pissed off audience, okay? And they weren't getting along. And there was one specific time where I was in the studio, I was talking to Farrah, and apparently they had a fight. Either they lived together, right? Either the night before or driving to the studio, because unbeknownst to me, behind me, Ryan was coming around the corner. She saw him, wanted to make him jealous, I guess, and at some very specific time, she picked up her shirt and flashed me. Now, this is not a complaint. If anything, I'm bragging, okay? But he saw this and he went nuts, okay? Here's his, they weren't married, but, they were living together for many years. They had a child together. But this is the kind of stuff that would go on between the 2 of them. And something, to this very day, this show was done in 91, 92. So now it's almost 30 years later. And there are people on that show who are just getting back on solid food. Okay. It was a nightmare for everybody.
Would you say, this is like a little bit of a digression, that you are the only person on the planet Earth who has had Farrah Fawcett show you her breasts, Milton Berle show you his penis, and you've licked Christie Brinkley's face? Would you say that anybody else has done those 3 things?
You want to know something? I hit the trifecta there, didn't I? I would think that in the annals of everything, there's a special place for somebody who's experienced all 3 of those things. Yeah. Milton Berle showed me his king-sized legendary member when he hosted SNL. And as far as Christie Brinkley's face is concerned, there's something called Celebrity Autobiography that which is really fun, and it's another thing that gets the writer out from behind, our laptops, where there's a theater in New York where we get on stage, 7 or 8 of us. We usually have it on a Monday night, so this way Matthew Broderick or any of the Broadway people like Katie Huffman, Nathan Lane, they can come because the theaters are dark. But Hanks has done it, Martin Short. We get on stage and we read from celebrities' autobiographies. And it's really funny, especially the indulgence of it. And we're not allowed to change any of the words. We can have inflections. We can raise an eyebrow. And there was one, they have mashups where they'll take 2 autobiographies and put them together to make little playlets out of it. And there was one that I had to do with Christie Brinkley. It was an autobiography that was written by Tommy Lee. And in it, he talks about meeting Pamela Anderson for the first time. So I was going to read Tommy Lee's part, and Christie Brinkley, was to read Pamela Anderson's part. And it got up to a part where we're rehearsing. We're upstairs in the green room because this was new material at the time. And I say to her, all right, it says here what Tommy Lee says, he was so overwhelmed by her beauty that he couldn't think of anything else to do than to lick her face. He just met it 12 seconds before. So when we got up to that part in our little rehearsal, I said, listen, I'll just mime licking your face. And she said, no, lick my face. I said, excuse me? And she said, no, lick my face. So that's what you're referring to. I went on stage and we got to that part. I licked her face.
And thank you for never licking my face, Alan. I just want to say.
Yeah, no, but we're young. We have our health. We have a lot of years for me to start licking anything.
Anyway, so getting back to our story, you now just had a complete failure with good sports, and you are in the word. And this is, I love this expression of your Bernie Brillstein, your agent. You are colder than whale shit. And you go then from there to another spectacular failure, the movie North. And this is where I'm not kidding. I just love the way you talk, you break down, because it's easy to talk about triumph and success, and but it's not so easy to talk about when things go wrong. And you're very critical of yourself there, but you set it up beautifully. You would talk a little bit about North and that whole experience.
It was a nightmare at the time, and it took me many years to make fun of it and to make fun of myself, embroiled in this nightmare. But at the time, when we lived in New York after I left SNL, I wrote a little novella called North. North was a 9-year-old boy who declared himself a free agent from his parents because he didn't feel appreciated, and offers his services as a devoted son. It goes all over the world, like a free agent. Who's going to give me what? I'll be your son if you sweeten the pot enough. The book did okay. Didn't do great, but when I sent it to Rob Reiner for a blurb for the book jacket, he called me up. He says, I love this book. He had done A Few Good Men. He did Spinal Tap. He did When Harry Met Sally. Let's make a movie. So this is music to a writer's ears. You write a book. I moved the family out to LA, and we had 3 children now. We relocated totally, and I'm hired to adapt my own book. And we cast Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Jason Alexander to play the parents, and Bruce Willis was in it, and my old friend Dan Aykroyd. Elijah Wood was 8 years old at the time. He was going to play North. There was a young actress who's also 8 years old. It was her first acting job. Her name was Scarlett Johansson. And Rob made this $50 million movie. And it was a big Hollywood premiere. There was still no internet at the time the way we have it now. So, this is 93-ish, okay? It was probably just the beginning of the internet, but it wasn't like, what we're doing now with emails and getting all sorts of information. And I flew my parents out from Florida. That's right, there were 2 less Jews in Boca that night. And they're out in LA, and there's this big premiere, biggest night of my life. I should have known that something was wrong, because when the lights came up in the theater of the premiere, it was me, my family, Rob. And the place was like a ghost town. It's like the theaters would be now if we were allowed to go into them with social distance. Nobody. Wow. And then that was further driven home the next morning when the reviews came out, when they appeared in the papers. And Dave, you know this, but for those of you who are watching this was Roger Ebert's review of North. This was
you have it in your wallet. You have it right in your wallet
with me, just in case a podcast breaks out. Okay. This is what the most influential movie critic in the country at the time thought of my masterpiece. I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. hated every simpering, stupid, fake-and audience-insulting moment of it, hated the sensibility that thought anyone would like it, hated the implied insult to the audience by its belief that anyone would actually be entertained by it. Now, on the surface, Dave, this may seem like an unfavorable review, okay? But if you read it, I think it was a nightmare. We lived in LA at the time where everybody sort of roots for everybody else's failure. Robin would go to the supermarket and come back where the other women who are our friends, we thought, were taunting her. Adam, our son Adam, who was, he was in like, he must have been like 12 at the time. He'd come home from school and he asked if we can change our last name to Sorkin. You know, it was just, it was horrible. And it did take quite a while, but it was so severely, he named his book, Roger Ebert did, which was a compilation of his reviews. I hated this movie, hated. He took it from this. So it was so overwhelming, and he was really piling on that after a while I went, okay, let's make this work for me. But I had to psychologically get to a place where I could make fun of it as opposed to cowering in the corner and whimpering. You know?
Well, I love that whole chapter, and I do like you didn't make amends with Roger Ebert at some point, did you not?
Oh, I had wondered what would happen if I ran into him, and because I didn't know how I would react. And years later, I had written a book, and I was on tour, and I was in Chicago, and that's where he lived, because I think he wrote for the Chicago Sun-Times.
Tribune.
Oh, the Tribune.
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody took me out to dinner to lunch, and over there, about 3-4 tables over, was Roger Ebert. And I remember he was with a couple of people, and he was wearing this oversized sweater with all the autumn colors on it, like burnt orange and gold and puke green. And it was this whole mishmash of stuff. And he got up from his table at one point, and I excused myself to whomever I was with, and I started following Roger Ebert, not knowing what I would do. It's like an out-of-body experience. Gee, I wonder what Alan's going to do when he catches up to Roger Ebert. And he went down the stairs and he went into a men's room. And I followed him into the men's room. And now we're both at the sink, and I still don't know what's going to happen. I'm just sort of praying that it won't eventually involve the police, okay, or an EMS truck or something. And we're both at the sink looking into the mirror, washing our hands. And I say, Roger, and he looks up into the mirror, sees me, and he's trying to place me. And I go, Alan Zweibel. And the blood drains from his face. I thought it was going to fill the sink. I never saw blood make an exit from any bodily part before. And I say, Roger, I just have to tell you that I hate that sweater you're wearing. And he looked at me, and he smiled, and I smiled. He laughed, I laughed, and then we shook hands, and that's the end of the Roger Ebert story. I mean, but it was, if I had seen him 6 months after this review, God knows. But once again, there was enough time, enough distance, and it's stuff that happens along the way, you know?
So at this point, you are not only colder than whale shit on television, but you've been colder than whale shit in the movie industry, a real low point. And then, like every good story, there's an arc to your story, and there's redemption, and it comes by way of Gilda Radner.
It was so, something, I think in the book, I say bunny, bunny, and then the subtitle of that chapter is Even in Death, Gilda Saves My Ass. I was really at a low point. Look, I had created a TV show that went into the tubes. Now this movie, and I was colder than whale shit in the two things that I did. Robin said to me, you should write something about you and Gilda. And I resisted it. I said, look, I don't want to capitalize on that. She said, to hell with that. She said, your best friend died. You haven't cried yet. This was about 4 years later. She died in 89. This is 1993-ish. And I went, all right, that made sense to me. So I started recreating everything that I could remember about my relationship with Gilda. Where did we meet? Oh yeah, behind the potted plant in Lorne's office. And I just started reconstructing dialogue. She talks, I talk, she talks, I talk. I just wanted it to be, I wanted the words to touch each other. I didn't want the formality of paragraphs or semicolons and things like that. And so I chronicled everything that I could remember about our 14-year relationship, starting with the plant and ending with a eulogy I gave at her memorial. And I had no plans. And once again, like you started off, this was saying, how do you remember these things? You know, look, I wasn't wired for 14 years. So it's like, so it's not literally, it can't literally be everything we said to each other, but it was more the spirit of the event, you know? And when I got to the end, and I wrote it mostly at red lights. There was a legal pad next to me on the passenger seat of the car, or I would wake up at 2 a.m. and start writing. And I was reconstructing this, and I didn't want it to end because that meant that Gilda was dead. She was alive as long as these words were, had interplay. And then when I got done with it, I thought, okay, catharsis is over. I showed the pages to people who knew Gilda, people who knew me and Gilda, people like Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Shandling and Rob Reiner. And they urged me to get it published. I resisted, and then I ultimately said, okay, this is a nice tribute to her. And I got it published. It's called Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, A Sort of Love Story. And the sort of is exactly what it was. It was this platonic relationship for 14 years where, I had been in love with her, and she didn't want to have anything to do with that. She was thrilled when I met Robin because that meant I wasn't chasing her anymore. But when she had gotten sick, she said, I want you to make me laugh. That was my role in her life. And I put it in the book that, I had to make her laugh. So even when I came, her last appearance was on its Gary Shandling show. And then even when I went to give blood at Mount Sinai Hospital, I was on a gurney, and a nurse came over and gave me a pad and a pen. And I said, what's this for? She said, well, Gilda likes to know whose blood she's getting. Write her something nice because she's having a tough time. And I wrote, Dear Gilda, I knew I'd get some fluid of mine into you one way or another. So all this stuff were on these pages, and I had it published. It was probably my biggest selling book, which I took as a tribute to Gilda. She was on the cover, her name was on it, and it was still, and it was a nice story. And as a result, a couple of things happened. There was a bit of a catharsis there. There was a bit of, I had started writing something and I completed it. Like when we talk about dry patches, when you get something down, you work through the writer's block. And you gave me, Dave, when I asked you, when I sent you a little questionnaire for the book, the funniest one that you gave me when I asked you about writer's block, you said you deal with writer's block the same way you deal with constipation. You just sit there, wait for something to come out. Which, okay, this had come out, and it seemed to free me up a little bit. And as it were, and shortly afterwards, Billy Crystal asked me to help him write a Broadway show called 700 Sundays, and things seemed to get back on track. But it was Gilda, and it was the memory of that which helped me dislodge. There we go with another constipation kind of metaphor. This is taking a weird turn, I know. And it was something that was really helpful in a way.
So, you mentioned 700 Sundays, which is Billy Crystal's incredibly successful one-man show. And I'm just wondering, when I was reading that, and I've seen the show, it's fantastic. How does that compare with when you talked about, when you did this with Shandling, and it was Shandling's life, and it became difficult for you at times with him? Have you had any experiences like that with Billy? I know you and he are very close, but here you are in that sort of same relationship.
Well, that's a great question, because he's speaking from the heart about a family that I never met. Okay, I maybe met his mom once, but his dad died when he was 15. That's where the title 700 Sundays comes from. You know, his dad worked 2-3 jobs, worked 6 days a week. Sundays was their day to spend time together. And his dad died suddenly when Billy was 15. So Billy figured out that he had roughly 700 Sundays with his father, hence the title. I didn't know these people, but they're Jews from Long Island. Billy lived 4 towns over from me and my family. So it's not like I was writing for Martians. I knew these people, even if I didn't meet them. But so I put words in those characters' mouths. I put words in Billy's mouth when talking about his life. Okay, there's a couple of things that are operative here. With Shandling, he couldn't say anything that he couldn't relate to. Billy, the same thing. At times, because it was he talking about his life. And God, is he talented. God, is he brilliant. He does all sorts of voices, and he can sing and he can dance, and he's such a good writer. What Billy had the ability to do, and if he didn't do it at times, it was my job to watch the play from out here and go, okay, you're in it. You're talking about it. I'm telling you from out here, this is a piece of drama, if you will. I don't want to sound lofty. This is what I think the play needs. We need a joke at your father's funeral, which is an odd thing to say, but it had gone very, the sentiments that were involved in talking about the death of his dad. He had just had a fight with his father, and his father went bowling and never came back. I said, we need to break the heaviness of this up a little bit. So sitting back here at times, and Billy is brilliant at it, but sitting back here, you go, all right, this is what we need here. We got to change tone just a little bit, just to remind the audience that this is a comedy, to remind them that this is entertaining, even though we're hitting some very heavy subject matter. So it was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had work-wise. Here I am, my good friend. We had never worked on anything together. He was trusting me with his life. So it was, I respected that gift that he gave me. And at the same time, I treated it with the utmost of care, But there was a balance. There's a balance of what's entertaining and what's just sort of remembering. And, there has to be a point to move a story along also. So you can't indulge one thing too much.
We have a couple questions we'll go through. One says, Alan, you better talk about our Kipling sketch.
Well, this has to be somebody from high school. It wasn't a sketch. It was a Soupy Sales joke. Where I don't know if you remember, Soupy Sales had a show, and he would have these sayings every day, you can fool some of the people some of the time, fool some of the people all of the time, but you can't con Edison. Things that didn't make sense, but were for some reason were funny. He had a joke saying, do you like Kipling? And the answer was, I don't know, I never kippled. So that's the only Kipling thing that I could think of. So that was a high school joke. So it must be, somebody that I knew in high school, like Matthew or Mitchell.
Another one says...
Once again, Dave, there's somebody from my high school.
Everybody in the United States went to high school with Alan Zweibel.
Dave Barry and Alan Zweibel walk into a bar. You can fill the rest.
Well, I know how Dave's going to answer it. It's going to be something about there's no room for anybody else in the bar because of my head.
Well, what about your head, Alan? Does it seem unusually large to you?
Well, look, I'm sitting here looking into my laptop, right? I barely see you. I see you. Is this me? Dave makes fun of my head. I wouldn't say incessantly. What word is more often than incessantly? Yeah, granted, it's a nice sized head, but you act like it affects tides. It's a head. There are people with bigger ones. I don't know who they are, but I'm sure they're somewhere.
Lunatics is our book club selection for the month. We're trying to coordinate a safe meeting for a discussion soon. Dave and Alan, do you have any suggestions on where we should concentrate our discussion?
Well, I would say the chapters that I wrote. I just want to say that Alan, when we wrote the book, Lunatics, we alternated chapters. We each took a character. And I don't know if Alan had ever written a novel before, but about a third of the way through the book, he sent me his chapter. And I don't want to get real technical, but generally in a novel, you have characters and a plot, and the characters do things and that becomes the plot. So we're about a third of the way through the book. We have our characters, they're doing the plot. And Alan set his scene on a cruise ship, and at the end of the scene, all of the main characters were dead. All of them. So we had to revise that a little bit just so we can make the plot work. So basically, I would say to the people in this group, focus on the every other than one I wrote.
I just want to add that there's much that I've learned from Dave. When I was growing up, my grandfather used to read Dave's column to me, and so to meet him was always a big thrill, and I'm thrilled to call him my friend. But I still learn a lot from him, and that one point has helped me with future books, that you don't kill the main characters, let's say before the end of the book. Otherwise, there's nobody to do anything.
A couple more questions. One came in. It's I was at the Live Talks LA event a few years ago with David Spade in conversation with Dana Carvey, and they were talking about the 40th anniversary event of SNL. Dana said that at the after show party, at one point, Paul McCartney was giving Dana Carvey a back rub. Do you know how that ended? And do you have any funny stories from that night?
Well, that didn't end. To my knowledge, Paul McCartney's still giving him that back rub. So that's to be determined what the end of that anecdote is. It was the most glorious evening. As a matter of fact, I talked a little bit about it in the preface, going to the show itself, because you look around and no matter how famous the person was, they were in awe of other people who were there. So you would have somebody like Mick Jagger going, look at all the stars that are here. You know, it was from every field of entertainment. It was incredible. At the after party, which was at the Plaza Hotel, there was a house band. And at one point, Aykroyd got on stage and he said, okay, let's get a real band up here. And he said, does anybody play bass? And Paul McCartney got on stage, okay? And then ultimately, Prince got on stage. And Jimmy Fallon, everybody was looking at who was, and they started playing. It was unbelievable. What was her name? Oh God. I'm losing, for some reason I'm forgetting some of the people who got on stage. It was classic. It was, you couldn't believe who was there. And it was just as casual as possible. And I remember running into Bill Murray. He goes, can you believe what's going on that stage? Who's there? And the whole evening was as if you took all the biggest names in music and in comedy and in politics and in sports. Before the show started, I went to the men's room and I found myself at a urinal. To my left was Peyton Manning and to my right was Eli Manning. And I went home and I verified the fact that this was the first time I had ever peed in between two all-pro quarterbacks before, while I was wearing a tuxedo. It was just this spectacular night.
And a final question. I know you were close to Al Franken, and I personally think he should not have resigned. Your thoughts on that? And have you talked to Al Franken since?
I still speak to Franken quite a lot. I saw him last, maybe about 3 weeks ago, and I am in touch with him. Any of us who knew Al couldn't believe a couple of things. How he got railroaded. You know, this was a bad frat joke. And I remember I was with Dave when this story broke. I think we were in Atlanta, Dave, and we were in a car from the airport to wherever we were going to meet Adam Mansbach to talk about our Haggadah book. And Dave had said that as long as they have that picture, Al's in a lot of trouble, okay? I don't think he should have resigned. No one who knows him thinks he should have resigned. To put his name in the same company with some of the really egregious offenders, during at the beginning of the Me Too movement, is not right. I think that the country needs that voice. I think we miss it. And when I'm with Al, I think that he's starting to be okay. He's starting to reemerge. He's starting to do his own speeches. He's got a podcast that I listen to a lot. And I think that there's a place for him. I don't know what his future plans are. I don't know if he knows what his future plans are. And if it's not politics, maybe he gets his own version of Bill Maher show. You know what I mean? Some HBO thing where he can voice himself and can be heard and have an effect.
Well, gentlemen, that brings us to close to a wrap. Thanks for doing this. A reminder for those in LA, our event with Alan in conversation with Larry David is owned. And as soon as it's safe to do so, we will put them together. Thank you for joining us. The book again drops on April 14th. Run to where books are sold. Take care.